Welcome, dear traveler of the night. Tonight, under the hush of the moon, I will take you on a journey, not through time, not through space, but into the stillness that has always been within you. For the next few hours, allow yourself to drift, not into sleep just yet, but into a deeper awareness, into stories passed down from the Zen masters, whispered between bamboo groves and echoing through the empty halls of forgotten temples. Stories about letting go of control, embracing impermanence, making peace with anger, sorrow, and the unknown. These are not tales for the mind alone, but for the heart, the soul, and the quiet voice in you that has always longed to be heard. Let each story unfold like incense smoke, slow, fragrant, healing. Let each breath soften you. And when your thoughts begin to fade into dreams, may they be dreams of awakening. Now, close your eyes if you wish. Breathe in deeply. And let us begin. Story 1. The Monk Who Breathed Through Stone. A story about resisting what cannot be changed and learning to soften even the hardest walls. 1. Opening reflection. The air was still in the valley of Gray Cloud Temple. At this hour, only the rustle of cedar needles in the wind could be heard, like ancient paper being turned. Mist rose in gentle coils from the forest floor, touching the wooden beams of the meditation hall, where a single candle flickered at the center. The monks had retired for the night, their minds quiet, their hearts folded inward, except for one. Tenzin sat alone in the inner courtyard, motionless, eyes open, body straight like bamboo. And yet everything inside him was tight, like a fist that refused to unclench, like a scream held underwater. He had been here 3 years now, but still, something in him fought. 2. The story, the breath that wouldn't come. Tenzin had come to the monastery after a life of battle, not swords or armies, but arguments and ambition. He had been a lawyer in the city, a feared one, precise, sharp-tongued. He could tear down a person's truth with a few chosen words and call it justice. But something in him broke the day he won a case against a dying man whose only mistake was being poor. The guilt festered. And when the guilt turned into silence, and the silence turned into shame, he came here. The abbot did not ask questions. He gave Tenzin a broom and a place to sleep. And for a while, sweeping leaves and fetching water was enough. But when the time came to sit, really sit, and breathe, he discovered a stone in his chest. No matter how many breaths he took, it never softened. No matter how still he sat, something inside resisted. He followed his breath as the teachers taught, but it was like following a thread into a wall. There was no space. "Why do I feel this hardness?" he once asked the old cook, a monk named Gendo, who had spent 50 years at Gray Cloud and barely spoke. Gendo said only, "Because you are trying not to feel it." That night, Tenzin sat in the meditation hall long after the bell. He tried to not try, but even that was effort. His breath felt tight, his ribs felt trapped. So he did what he always did when things got hard. He blamed. He blamed the cushion, the cold, the form, the silence. He even blamed the stone lantern outside that never moved. That night, in a rare moment of frustration, he whispered at the lantern, "You and I are the same." And then something odd happened. The candle behind him went out. 3. Philosophical commentary. The Zen masters often teach that resistance is not a thing. It is inactivity. The moment we say, "This shouldn't be," We place ourselves in combat with what is. And in that battle, even the breath becomes a weapon against the body. What Tenzin experienced was not new. Many seekers carry their past into the cushion, hoping meditation will erase their pain, not realizing that the cushion is not an eraser, it is a mirror. In the Zen tradition, there is a saying, "The obstacle is not the path. The clinging to the obstacle is the path." Tenzin was not breathing through stone. He was holding it. 4. Modern psychological reflection. In contemporary psychology, we often speak of emotional repression as a kind of body armor. When trauma or guilt are too large to process, we tuck them into the muscles, the breath, the posture. Over time, we don't even realize we're holding them. Somatic therapists describe how old pain hides in the diaphragm, how fear grips the jaw, how anger roots itself in the shoulders. Tenzin's breath was not blocked by spiritual failure, but by a lifetime of needing to be strong, composed, invulnerable. In court, he was not allowed to feel. In life, he was trained to fix. But healing doesn't come by fixing. It comes by witnessing. 5. Closing, meditation and contemplation. Weeks passed, and one evening while sitting in the same courtyard, Tenzin stopped trying to push the breath. He let the tightness stay. He welcomed it even. He imagined the stone in his chest was not an enemy, but a teacher. He imagined its voice. "You have buried me here so I would not be seen," it whispered. "I am your fear of being soft. I am your fear of breaking." And in that moment, he wept, not from pain, but from recognition. The breath came, shallow at first, then deeper. And for the first time in his life, he felt the air move through him like wind through a flute. The stone was still there, but it no longer blocked. It echoed. He bowed to the stone lantern that night. It had not changed, but he had. A final word for the listener. Dear listener, what stones have you carried into your breath tonight? Have you, like Tenzin, been trying to meditate the pain away without letting yourself feel it? There is no path through stone, only the path of softening around it. Remember the Buddha's words. As a rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not shaken by praise or blame. Dhammapada, verse 81. But the rock within us must first be known before it can be still. So tonight, before you sleep, take a breath, not to fix, not to change, but to say to your chest, your belly, your back, "I see you. You are allowed to be here." And rest. Story 2. The Butterfly Who Remembered Being Wood. A story of transformation, subtle memory, and the fear of stillness. 1. Gentle opening. A soft wind rustled the young maple leaves in the courtyard of Plum Hollow Monastery. It was early spring, and the last of the ice had melted into the earth, leaving behind the sense of wet moss and silence. The old monk Ryokan sat beneath a half-bloomed cherry tree, sipping tea alone. His eyes were half closed, not from sleepiness, but from listening. A student named Jiro approached, troubled. "Master," he said, "I feel I am moving in circles. I meditate, I study the sutras, I tend the garden, but my restlessness never fades. It is like I am trying to fly while something inside me still remembers crawling." Ryokan set his cup down gently. "Then let me tell you the story," he said, "of the butterfly who remembered being wood." The story of wings and memory. Long ago, in a forgotten forest where mist never lifted, there stood a wooden statue of Kannon, the bodhisattva of compassion. She had been carved from the stump of an old cypress tree by a silent monk who worked with no tools, only water and time. The statue stood near a hidden spring where no one came to pray. Yet birds perched on her shoulders, and moss gently clothed her feet. The forest itself bowed to her presence. For many decades she stood unmoving. Rain polished her face. Wind hollowed her eyes. Time passed. One day a great change came. A monk, lost and weary, came to the forest and wept at her feet, his tears soaking into the earth. That night, struck by moonlight, the statue cracked, not with decay, but with awakening. From her wooden chest emerged a cocoon, long buried in stillness. And from that cocoon, days later, a butterfly was born. The butterfly unfurled its wings slowly, stretching in the morning sun. It blinked in the light, astonished at the air and motion. It had no words, but it carried within its tiny body the memory of standing still for lifetimes. It did not fly at once. Instead, it clung to the base of the statue, trembling. "Fly," whispered the wind. But the butterfly hesitated, for though it had wings, it still believed itself to be wood. In time, it did fly, but every time it soared above the trees, something inside pulled it downward. A whisper, a shape, a heaviness that said, "Stillness is safer than sky." And so the butterfly returned to the statue often, hovering close but never quite landing, drawn by a feeling it could not name. It longed to fly forever, but it also longed for the ground it came from. 3. Zen Commentary. Rokan looked at Jiro, his student, who had listened without blinking. "Master, was the butterfly wrong to remember?" Jiro asked. "No," Rokan replied, "but neither was it wrong to fly." In Zen, we do not see transformation as a single event. There is no fixed line between caterpillar and butterfly, sinner and sage, thought and emptiness. What was wood becomes wing. And yet memory lingers, not in the mind, but in the subtle shape of our reactions. We sit on the cushion and remember movement. We walk in the world and remember stillness. We try to let go, but the hands have curled for so long they do not know how to open. This, too, is part of the path. 4. Psychological insight. Modern psychology speaks of emotional memory, the way experiences imprint themselves not in words, but in the nervous system. You may grow, change, meditate, achieve. But deep within the body lives an echo, the posture of your trauma, the silence of your fear, the tension of an old defense. Like the butterfly, we may believe we've become free, but still carry the weight of who we once had to be. It is not a failure to feel this. It is not regression to remember. In fact, true healing often begins when we acknowledge the shadow of the old self without shame. "I remember stillness," says the butterfly, "but I do not have to return to it." Contemplative ending. Jiro bowed. "So what should I do with this feeling of wanting to rise, but being pulled down by something invisible?" "Do not push it away," Ryokan said. "Sit with it. Let the memory unfold. Let it show you how long you stood without moving, without breathing, without being seen." He poured another cup of tea. "You are not the butterfly trying to escape the wood. You are the entire story." That night, Jiro did not force his meditation. He did not chase stillness. He simply sat, hands open, heart soft, and listened to the whisper inside that said, "I remember." And when the breath came, it was not effort. It was remembering how to fly and choosing not to run from the wind. To you, dear listener, tonight, as you lie still beneath your blanket of stars, ask yourself gently, What part of me still believes I must not move? Is there a voice that tells you, you are not ready to rest, not worthy to fly, not safe to feel? And can you, just for tonight, be kind to that voice? Let your body remember what it once had to hold. Let it tremble. Let it soften. There is no need to force the wings. They know when to open. As the Buddha once said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. So breathe and remember, you were once still. Now you are free. And even if you forget again, you can always return to the wind. Sleep well. Story 3. When the Moon Forgot Her Name. A story of identity loss, emotional fatigue, and silent renewal. 1. Opening in the shadow of the night. In the stillness between dusk and sleep, when the world becomes a silver breath, the moon usually rises, quiet and whole, casting her soft glow on rivers, rooftops, and the windows of those too restless to sleep. But one night, in a forgotten village nestled between rice fields and prayer flags, the moon did not appear. The villagers looked up, puzzled. The stars were bright, the sky cloudless, yet the moon was gone, as if the heavens had misplaced her. And far above, in the silent folds of space, the moon herself sat alone behind a veil of shadow, uncertain, trembling, having forgotten who she was. 2. The story, The Moon Who Could Not Shine. For 1,000 nights, the moon had circled the earth in gentle rhythm, waxing, waning, reflecting light she did not own, yet gave freely. She bathed lovers in poetry, watched over pilgrims and animals alike, and whispered her calm into a million dreams. But slowly, without notice, something changed. It began as a whisper in her stillness. What is your purpose, really? Then a doubt. You only reflect. You create nothing of your own. Then a heaviness. You are nothing without the sun. These thoughts clung to her like mist that never lifted. Night after night, she rose out of habit, but something in her dimmed. The joy in her silence, the ease in her orbit, all began to weigh upon her like stone. She felt tired in a way no star could explain. And then, one night, she paused. She hovered just beneath the horizon and whispered into the dark. Who am I? And in asking the question, she lost her name. 3. Zen Reflection. Losing to awaken. In Zen, there is a saying, when I let go of who I am, I become what I might be. But what if the letting go is not graceful? What if the forgetting is not chosen, but slow, exhausting, and terrifying? The moon did not seek oblivion. She simply reached a point where reflection became fatigue. Her entire existence, giving, lighting, soothing, had turned into something automatic, disconnected from her own sense of being. Much like us, we play roles, the healer, the strong one, the responsible one, the wise one. But one day we wake and the mirror no longer speaks. This is not failure. This is a beginning. 4. Psychological insight. Identity fatigue. In modern psychological terms, what the moon experienced could be seen as identity fatigue, a subtle form of emotional burnout where even the roles we love begin to weigh us down. Therapists recognize this in caregivers, teachers, spiritual leaders, parents, those whose lives revolve around service, around reflecting light for others. Over time, without replenishment, these roles become masks. Behind the smile, a question forms. Do I exist beyond what I give? When the moon forgot her name, she wasn't broken. She was emptying herself, so something truer could emerge. 5. The silent turning point. Back in the village, a child named Aiko noticed the darkness. She wasn't afraid. She simply missed the moon. So every night, she climbed the hill with a bowl of water, placed it on the ground, and said softly, "Dear moon, I will hold your place until you remember." Each night, she waited. The bowl, still and round, held the reflection of stars, clouds, even passing the moon. Until one night, the moon, still hidden behind her doubt, saw the small bowl shining faintly on earth. She felt a tug, not of duty, but of tenderness. A child holding her place with silence. Something ancient stirred. Not obligation, not identity, but stillness, becoming love again. She breathed, and in that breath, she remembered, not her name, but her being. She was not the reflection. She was not even the light. She was the presence that made stillness visible. And so, quietly, she rose. Ending, a reflection for the listener. Tonight, you may find yourself like the moon, exhausted by your own orbit, tired of shining, unsure who you are beneath all the roles you carry. Let that be okay. You do not need to be full every night. You do not need to remember your name to still be worthy of rising. The Buddha once said, "Just as the moon emerges from behind the clouds, so too shall the truth emerge from your heart." So if you've forgotten how to feel joy, rest. If you've forgotten your name, breathe. And if you've forgotten your light, let someone hold the bowl for you. Tonight, you are not broken. You are simply pausing. And in that pause, your real self is waiting, not to be found, but to be felt. Good night, dear moon. Come back when you're ready. Story 4. The River That Refused to Flow. A story about control, resistance, and the healing power of surrender. 1. A Still Beginning. In the high mountains of the north, where clouds rest low and moss grows on stone like memory on an old man's face, there once lived a river. She had no name, for rivers rarely name themselves. She had carved her path through valleys and rocks for centuries, humming her songs through pine forests, feeding deer and monks and wildflowers alike. Her voice changed with the seasons, soft in spring, angry in storm, silent in winter stillness. And for the longest time, she flowed. Until one year, she did not. It was not drought, nor ice, nor a blockage. She simply stopped. The river, for reasons unknown, refused to flow. 2. The story, The River Who Chose to Hold Back. It began when the river heard rumors whispered by birds and winds. A dam had been built far downstream, an enormous concrete wall, cold and unnatural, caging the water for human need. Her waters, once free, were being measured, diverted, sold. Her currents were turned into electricity. Her story was no longer hers. She felt invaded, she felt betrayed. And so, deep within her mountain source, she made a choice. I will not be used, she thought. I will not feed a world that chains me. And with that, she held herself. She gathered her waters high in her chest, behind rocks and snowmelt. The usual creeks dried. The animals came and found nothing. Even the monks in the monastery below noticed the silence, the absence of her voice. Some said the river was angry. Others said she was sick. But none guessed the truth. She was resisting. She had learned the word control, and like many who are wounded, she mistook withholding for freedom. 3. Zen commentary, resistance as suffering. In Zen, we say, the tighter you hold, the more pain you feel. The more you push, the more you bleed. The river believed she was protecting herself, but in truth, she was denying her nature. A river that doesn't flow is not a river. It is a prison, and so her waters turned inward. What was once movement became stagnation. What was once song became pressure. The birds left, the trees below withered, and deep within she began to tremble, not with anger now, but with the unbearable weight of self-containment. She had become her own dam. 4. Psychological insight, when withholding becomes a cage. Modern trauma psychology often describes emotional withholding as a common survival strategy. When we feel violated, manipulated, or unseen, we learn to pull inward, to stop giving, to stop feeling, to stop flowing. It feels like power, but it is protection laced with pain. Over time, we confuse stillness with safety. We confuse numbness with peace. We confuse refusal with control. But like the river, we begin to rot from within. Our joy dries, our energy thickens, our inner life becomes crowded, heavy, too much to bear. What began as defense becomes suffering. And only through surrender, not weakness, but release, do we begin to move again. 5. The turning point, a single drop. One morning, an old monk named Shinjo, who had lived beside the river all his life, walked up the dried bed barefoot. He did not chant, he did not demand. He simply sat on a flat rock where the water once passed. He placed his gnarled hands on the warm stone, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Dear river, we do not wish to own you, only to remember your song." Then he wept, not from desperation, but from reverence. And a single tear fell onto the stone. The river high above felt it, not the words, not the sorrow, but the absence of demand. Something softened, not all at once, but enough. A single drop loosened, then another, and another. Until, without force, without effort, without even decision, she flowed. Quietly at first, then freely. Not for the monk, not for the forest, but for herself. 6. Ending reflection. For you who are listening. Tonight, you may feel like the river, tired of being used, tired of giving, tired of not being seen. And perhaps, like her, you've held yourself back, not out of malice, but because flowing felt unsafe. If so, know this. Your stillness is not wrong, but it is not your true home. The Buddha taught, just as a river flows down to the ocean, the mind trained in wisdom flows toward peace. You do not have to force anything. Just soften. Just breathe. Just allow one drop of grief, of joy, of silence to move. And in that small movement, the river in you will remember. You were born not to be controlled, not to control others, but to move with life, to nourish without depletion, to sing without being captured. So tonight, as you lie in stillness, ask, what am I holding back, and can I let just one drop go? You don't have to flood the world. You only have to let go of the dam, gently. Sleep well, river. Your song is waiting. Story 5. Tea from the Broken Teapot. A story of shame, imperfection, and the rediscovery of quiet worth. 1. Gentle Introduction. In a small monastery nestled between two almond orchards, where spring petals fell like silent prayers, lived a humble kitchen attendant named Emma. She was not a monk, nor a student, nor even a novice. She had come many years ago as a woman grieving, and she had stayed, not to become enlightened, but to serve tea and sweep floors. Her robes were gray, her voice softer than wind through rice paper. Most never noticed her, and that was how she preferred it, until the day the teapot broke. 2. The story, the shattered vessel. It was an old clay pot, fired by a village artisan long forgotten, shaped unevenly but beloved in its quiet usefulness. It had no glaze, no markings, no beauty by worldly standards, but it poured smoothly, held heat well, and had served tea to generations of monks in silence. Emma loved this teapot. She warmed it each morning with hot water. She spoke to it without words. She cleaned it as if it were sacred. But one rainy afternoon, while hurrying to serve a visiting master, her foot slipped on the wet stone outside the tea room. The tray tumbled, porcelain shattered, and the old teapot cracked in two right down the center. She gasped. The monks ran out to help her, but she did not feel the fall, only the loss. Her hands trembled as she gathered the pieces. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but not to the monks. She was speaking to the pot. That night, she buried the shards behind the tool shed like ashes of a friend. And after that, something in her grew silent. 3. Zen reflection. Broken things still hold. The next morning, the abbot found Emma in the kitchen, her hands resting on the table, unmoving. "You didn't make tea today," he said gently. "I can't," she replied. "The pot is gone." He looked around. "There are others, but they're not right." He smiled. "You mean they're not broken." She lowered her gaze. He said nothing more, only walked outside. A few hours later, he returned with the broken teapot in his hands. It had been repaired, but not hidden. The crack ran boldly down its side, now filled with golden resin. Kintsugi, the ancient art of mending with gold, not to disguise the wound, but to honor it. He poured hot water into it. It did not leak, and from it he served her tea. 4. Psychological insight. The wound is not the end. In modern psychology, we often equate brokenness with shame. From childhood, we are taught to hide our flaws, mask our hurts, and present only what is smooth, whole, normal. But healing is not about perfection. It is about integration. Kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing pottery with gold, is a physical embodiment of what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the emergence of new meaning, resilience, and beauty after pain. The crack in the pot was not its failure. It was its history. And by embracing it, the pot became something more than whole. So too with us. Our broken places, when faced with compassion, become conduits for deeper presence. 5. The quiet restoration. Emma served tea again the next day, quietly as before. But something had changed. She poured not just liquid into cups, but calm. She moved slower. She smiled more. Some said her tea tasted better. She said nothing. But those who drank it felt something soften in their chest, like a knot unwinding, like old guilt lifting just a little. The teapot sat always at the center of the table. Some noticed the gold, most didn't. But Emma did. She saw herself in that line of light. 6. For you, the listener. Tonight, perhaps you carry a crack of your own. Perhaps something in you has been dropped, by your own hand or someone else's, and you have buried the pieces in silence, ashamed that you could not stay whole. But let this story sit beside you like warm tea. You are not less because you broke. You are more because you lived. The Buddha said, "As a lotus grows from the mud, so does wisdom grow from the wound." So do not hide your fracture. Let it speak. Let it shine. You are not a flaw to be erased. You are a story to be honored. And perhaps, like Emma's tea, your presence can offer warmth to someone else's quiet ache. So before sleep, breathe deeply and say to the cracked place within you, "You still hold." Story 6. The Hermit Who Fed His Echo. A story of loneliness, imagined enemies, and the gentle art of befriending your own voice. 1. A distant beginning. High above the mist-draped cliffs of the eastern ridge, beyond where even crows dared not nest, stood a crumbling hermitage carved into stone. Few knew who lived there. Fewer still cared to ask. But it was said that at night, when the wind died and the moon rose white and full, a strange voice could be heard, muttering, laughing, arguing with itself. Some said it was a ghost. Others whispered of a mad monk. In truth, it was a man named Nari, and he was very much alive. 2. The Story, The Man Who Talked to the Mountain. Nari had not always lived alone. Long ago, he had been a gifted orator at the capital temple. His words could move crowds to tears. His sermons flowed like rivers. He was respected, even loved. But adoration is a fickle wind, and when a younger monk outshined him, gentler, clearer, more radiant, envy crept into Nari's heart like ivy on old stone. Rather than face the slow erosion of his importance, Nari withdrew. He packed his robes, left his scrolls, and vanished into the mountains. "I will find truth in solitude," he told himself. But solitude, unexamined, becomes echo. At first, Nari welcomed the silence, the cold, the space. But within weeks, he began to hear a voice, his own, but twisted slightly. Not spoken aloud, but bouncing back from the cavern walls of his hermitage. It criticized his posture. It questioned his past. It doubted his worth. He called it the echo. And slowly, without realizing, he began to speak to it. 3. Zen Reflection, Echoes of the Unseen Mind. In Zen, we say, "What you resist within becomes a mirror without." Nari was not mad. He was simply encountering what most of us avoid, the undistracted, unfiltered voice of the ego. Not the self that breathes and feels and is present, but the self built of memory, pride, resentment, comparison. Without noise, the echo grows louder. Without others to distract us, the conversation turns inward. And unless we are trained to see through it, we begin to believe the echo is real, an enemy, a companion, a judge. But the echo is not a presence, it is a projection. 4. Psychological insight, internal dialogues, and self-criticism. Modern psychology refers to this as the inner critic, the internalized voice formed from past experiences, often rooted in shame, fear, or unmet needs. When isolated or overwhelmed, the inner critic can become dominant. We begin to ruminate. We rehearse old failures. We anticipate rejection before it arrives. And without compassion, the mind turns on itself. Nari, like many, mistook the echo for truth. But all along, it was simply the unattended part of his mind crying for presence. Not correction, not argument, just awareness. The turning point. A cup of silence. One autumn morning, as dry leaves scraped the stones like restless feet, Nari sat at the edge of his cave, cradling a chipped tea bowl. The echo had been cruel that week, accusing him of cowardice, calling him a fraud, mocking even his silence. But this morning, Nari did not argue. He did not reply. He simply listened. And when the echo said, "You're nothing without them," he smiled softly and whispered, "That may be so." And for the first time, the echo did not return. The mountain held its breath. In that moment of surrender, not defeat, but openness, Nari felt something shift. Not a voice, not a thought, a space, a softening. The echo had fed on his resistance. When he let go, it dissolved. That evening, he descended the mountain for the first time in years. 6. Closing. For the quiet places inside you. Tonight, dear listener, perhaps you too have heard echoes in your mind. Harsh voices, old accusations, fears disguised as truth. They are not madness. They are memory. And like Nari, you need not fight them. You need not silence them. You only need to hear them, fully, without judgment. The Buddha said, "Nothing can harm you as much as your own unguarded thoughts, and nothing can heal you as quickly as a quiet mind." So, as you lie still, ask gently, what have I been arguing with inside myself? And what happens if I no longer reply? Let your breath be the only voice now. Let it rise and fall like wind against stone. No reply, no echo, only presence. Sleep well, mountain dweller. Your silence is enough. Story 7. The Child Who Planted Silence. A story about stillness, presence, and the healing power of quiet hearts. 1. An unassuming beginning. In a village surrounded by mountains and woven together by footpaths and bamboo groves, there was a school that taught more than numbers and words. It was a school of breath, of bell sounds and bare feet, of quiet waiting. It was a Zen school, and though small, it hummed with deep peace, except when a certain boy named Koji arrived each morning, bursting through the gate like a firework with legs. Koji was 7. He did not sit still. He did not whisper. He did not, as the teachers hoped, respect the sound of silence. He respected frogs and kites and loud songs about dragons, but not silence. To him, silence was what grown-ups used to make things boring. Until the day he met the old monk in the garden. 2. The story of seeds, stillness, and a bowl of wind. One afternoon, while hiding from a lesson on breathing, which he found tedious, Koji ducked behind the garden wall and stumbled upon a figure kneeling in the earth. The old monk's name was Jinen, and he was unlike the other adults Koji had met. He didn't flinch when Koji shouted. He didn't scold. He didn't even look up. He was planting something. Koji peered closer. What kind of seeds are those? Jinen smiled without turning. Silence. Koji frowned. That's not a real plant. It is, Jinen said, placing another seed. But it doesn't grow like the others. You don't water it with water. You water it with waiting. Koji blinked. Waiting is boring. Jinen nodded. That's why very few people ever see it bloom. Intrigued, Koji asked to help. The monk handed him a small bowl and said, "Place it there. Then wait." For how long? Until it's full. Koji looked inside. It was empty. With what? He asked. With wind. 3. Zen reflection. Watering with waiting. In Zen, there are many koans, riddles that the rational mind cannot solve, only experience. To grow silence is to unlearn noise. To sit and wait for something unmeasurable is to enter the field of presence. The bowl of wind is not a trick, it is a mirror. When we pause to listen, not for a reply, not for reward, but simply to be, something unseen takes root. Koji did not know this, but he sat, and for once, he did not fill the space with questions. 4. Psychological insight, teaching stillness to the restless. Modern child psychology often views restlessness not as disobedience, but as an overflow of stimulation, emotion, or unmet needs. The mind of a child, especially one full of curiosity like Koji, is rarely quiet on command. But what if silence is not taught as absence, but as attention? Jinin, the old monk, did not impose silence. He invited Koji into it through story, play, metaphor. This is how nervous systems soften, not by force, but by relationship. Silence, when planted gently, becomes trust, and trust becomes rest. 5. The moment the bowl was full. Koji sat longer than he ever had before. At first, he waited for something dramatic, a breeze to swoop in, or the bowl to glow. But nothing came. Then something curious happened. He stopped waiting. Not because he was tired, but because he forgot he was waiting. He noticed the way sunlight danced through the leaves. He noticed the rhythm of his own breath. He noticed a butterfly land on the rim of the bowl, just for a second. And in that moment, he felt full. Not the bowl, himself. When Jinin returned, Koji didn't speak. He simply smiled. And the monk bowed, not to the child, but to the silence blooming in him. 6. A reflection for you, dear listener. Tonight, perhaps you too are restless, not because of caffeine or noise or thought, but because a part of you has forgotten how to wait without demand. So many of us were never taught that silence is not emptiness. It is fullness waiting to be felt. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. But even better than that is a breath that brings peace without words at all." So tonight, as you lie down, imagine a small bowl beside your bed, empty, waiting, not for sound, but for presence. And let each breath fill it, not with wind, but with you. Sleep well, child of quiet. Your silence is growing. Story 8. The Candle That Lit a Storm. A story about unintended harm, emotional reaction, and deep responsibility. 1. Opening. Before the wind came. The temple sat in the heart of a valley, where mist curled like incense and time moved slower than thought. Its roofs were red with age, its walls gently bowed from decades of summer heat and winter sighs. Inside its main hall, dozens of candles burned each night, not for spectacle, but for memory. Each flame was a name, each wick a prayer. There was a young monk there named Anzu, quiet, clever, and sometimes too quick to act. 2. The Story, A Flame and Fury. Anzu had been assigned to tend the memorial candles. It was a humble task, one usually given to novices, but Anzu took pride in doing it precisely. One evening, as he was lighting the final row, a senior monk named Riku entered the hall. His robes were tattered with mud from gardening, and he walked with the slowness of someone who had long made peace with silence. He stopped beside Anzu and softly corrected him. "Hold the match lower. The way you do it now bends the wick too quickly." Anzu stiffened. He did not reply, but his heart flared hotter than the candle in his hand. Why must Riku always offer advice without being asked? Why could he never just observe silently like the other monks? Later that night, when no one was around, Anzu returned to the hall. A quiet, rebellious energy buzzed in him. He relit the candle Riku had pointed out, just to do it his way. But as he moved, a breeze slipped through a side window, and the flame caught a scroll nearby. It happened fast. By the time he extinguished the fire, several names were burned. Nothing else was damaged, but the damage had been done. 3. Zen reflection, the spark behind the flame. In Zen, we speak often of the second arrow. The Buddha once taught that when pain strikes us, that is the first arrow, inevitable and beyond our control. But the second arrow is our reaction, anger, pride, retaliation. It is the second arrow that we shoot ourselves. Anzu's small defiance was not born of hatred, but from the subtle pride of being right, the belief that correction equals insult, that silence is safer than being seen as wrong. But fire does not care for motives, it only feeds on what is offered. 4. Psychological insight, the cost of emotional reactivity. Modern psychology often explores the fight-or-flight response, how our nervous system, when triggered, reacts faster than our logic can catch up. Anzu's experience mirrors something many of us do daily. React impulsively not to the situation itself, but to the meaning we attach to it. A comment becomes a judgment. A suggestion becomes an attack. A quiet gesture becomes rejection. We respond not from presence, but from unhealed memory. And in doing so, we may light fires we never meant to start. 5. The turning point, cleaning what can't be repaired. Anzu did not tell anyone what had happened, but the abbot noticed the charred scrolls the next morning. When he asked, no one claimed responsibility. Days passed. The hall smelled faintly of smoke, though no one spoke of it. But inside Anzu, the silence grew louder than flames. Finally, he came to the abbot at dusk, bowing deeply. "I caused the fire," he said. "It was not an accident. It was a choice made in pride." The abbot did not respond with punishment. He simply said, "Then let your atonement be presence. From now on, you will sit by the candle hall each night and listen, not to speak, not to serve, but to listen to the flame." So Anzu did. Night after night, he sat in silence before the candles, watching them tremble in the dark. He listened not only to the flicker, but to the heat in his own chest, softening. Over time, the anger turned to sorrow. The sorrow turned to tenderness, and the tenderness became breath. 6. A reflection for you as you settle into sleep. Tonight, perhaps you too have spoken from heat, acted from pride, lit a flame you later feared. And perhaps, like Anzu, you carry not the fire, but the echo of it. Let it be. Do not rush to explain or fix. Just sit with the candle. Let its flicker remind you. Every moment is a match. Every word a spark. Every silence a chance to begin again. The Buddha once said, "Speak only when your words are more beautiful than silence." But even silence, when heavy with truth, becomes healing. So take this moment to reflect. What flame did I feed today? And what would happen if, tomorrow, I chose not to strike the match? Breathe in. Let the storm pass. You are not the fire. You are the witness. And you can choose peace again. Sleep well, keeper of the candle. Story 9. A Whisper Carved in Ice. A story about impermanence, quiet grief, and learning how to melt with grace. 1. Prelude. In a land that forgot spring. Far in the northern reaches, where even pine trees bend from the weight of snow, and breath turns to mist before it leaves the lips, there stood a monastery carved entirely from ice. Walls of translucent blue, hallways that echoed every footstep, a silence so thick it felt as though time had frozen along with the stone. This was the Temple of Winter Eyes. The monks here did not chant aloud. They meditated in stillness, wrapped in fur and frost, their presence barely stirring the air. They lived not to avoid the cold, but to become intimate with what cannot be controlled. Among them was a novice named Sora, and Sora had a secret. Each morning before sunrise, while the others sat facing the ice altar, he crept to the edge of the cliff behind the temple and began to carve delicate shapes into the frozen rock. Faces, animals, even words. But every morning when he returned, they had faded, melted, eroded by wind. Still, he carved, until one day something changed. 2. The story, a voice that would not stay. Sora had arrived at the temple after the death of his sister. She had been the only family he had left, and her passing had left a space in him that no warmth could reach. He did not come to become enlightened. He came to forget. But forgetting proved impossible. Even as he sat in meditation, her laughter echoed between the ice walls. Her voice lingered in snowflakes. Her absence froze in his chest like an icicle that never thawed. So he began to carve. Each morning he etched her name into the ice. He told himself it was a ritual of remembrance, but secretly he hoped, foolishly, that the shape of her memory might survive. That one morning the sun would rise and her name would still be there. But it never was. No matter how deeply he cut, the ice gave her back. Until one morning, in desperation, he carved a single word, "Stay," and watched it melt before he had even finished the final stroke. He collapsed to his knees, heart pounding, breath burning the frozen air. "Why does nothing stay?" he cried into the wind. The ice did not answer, but behind him, someone did. 3. Zen Commentary, The Mountain That Breathes. It was the old monk Kintsu who had long passed the age of ambition and now walked like a shadow between snowdrifts. "You are trying to make permanence from breath," he said. Sora didn't look up. "I only want to hold what I've lost." Kintsu knelt beside him. "And that," he said, "is why you are suffering." In Zen, we say, to grasp the snowflake is to lose it, but to feel it on the tongue is to know it truly. Sora had mistaken love for possession, grief for debt, memory for monument. But ice teaches one lesson, always the same. What is most beautiful is not meant to last. 4. Psychological insight, grief, memory, and the illusion of control. In psychology, we learn that grief is not simply sadness. It is the protest of the nervous system against change. We do not only mourn what we lost, we mourn the loss of familiarity, the rhythm of old comforts, the illusion that things could stay the same forever. Sora's carvings were not only for his sister. They were his attempt to anchor time, to freeze the past, to make what was once real stay. But healing does not come from carving deeper. It comes from letting the ice melt and drinking the water. 5. The thawing within. Kintsu stood and walked toward the cliff edge. "Come," he said. Sora followed. The old monk pointed to a thin icicle hanging from a nearby branch. The sun was touching it now. Slowly, it began to drip. "Watch," Kintsu whispered. A single drop fell, caught the light, and disappeared into the snow. "Is it gone?" Kintsu asked. Sora thought. "No, it's changed." The monk smiled. "So too, your sister." Sora stood in silence for a long while. Then, with trembling hands, he took the carving tool from his belt and placed it gently in the snow. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in many months, he let her go. Not to forget, but to stop trying to make her stay. That night, the temple felt warmer. For you who still carves in ice. Tonight, perhaps you too have tried to hold something, someone, a moment, so tightly that it began to slip from your hands. Maybe you've carved names in ice, built statues from memory, lit candles hoping time would pause just for you. But nothing in this life stays, not because it is cruel, but because it is alive. The Buddha once said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering." So tonight, breathe. Place the carving tool beside you. Let the name melt if it must. The love does not melt with it. The water that comes is not the loss. It is the return. Sleep now, gentle soul. Let the ice become water. Let the water become you. Story 10. The Well That Dreamed of the Ocean. A story about smallness, yearning, and the illusion of not being enough. 1. Opening, where stillness met the sky. In a forgotten village nestled between two sand-colored hills, there was a well. Not a grand well, not a deep or wide or famous one, just a plain circle of stones, sun-bleached, surrounded by wild grass and dragonflies. It had stood there for generations, holding water that never dried. And yet, the well was unhappy. It looked up at the birds who soared overhead. It listened to the travelers passing by, speaking of rivers and waterfalls and the great blue sea beyond the horizon. And every night, beneath a sky so vast it seemed endless, the little well would sigh. "I am just a puddle in a hole," it whispered. "I am not the ocean." 2. The story. The well that longed to be more. The well, though made of stone, had a voice of its own, quiet, ancient, shaped by wind and echoes. And in that voice grew a question. What if I am not enough? Every time someone came to draw water, the well would flinch, afraid of running dry. It feared being empty, forgotten, useless. One day, a traveler knelt beside the well. An old monk with robes the color of sand and eyes that saw without searching. He drew a bucket, drank slowly, and smiled. "You are generous," the monk said. But the well did not feel generous. It felt drained. "Why do you thank me?" the well asked. "I'm just a tiny well. I will never be the sea." The monk chuckled softly. "You are asking the wrong question." 3. Zen Commentary. The water was never yours. In Zen, we often misunderstand the nature of identity. We think we are the vessel, the container, the form. But the truth is, we are not the well. We are the water flowing through it. The well believed it was lacking because it compared its form to the ocean. But the essence was the same. The same water that fills oceans, flows through rivers, falls as rain, was what rested in its dark, cool center. When we compare our roles, titles, appearances to something larger, grander, more recognized, we suffer. But when we rest in presence, we see, even a single drop can reflect the whole sky. 4. Psychological insight. The myth of not enough. Modern psychology has a name for the well's ache: inadequacy schema, a deeply held belief that one is fundamentally lacking, insufficient, not worthy of love or value unless constantly proving otherwise. Many of us live this way. We measure ourselves against oceans, others' success, social standards, the imagined ideal self we think we should become. But healing begins when we stop striving and begin receiving, not achievements, but awareness, not more, but what already is. 5. The moment of realization. The monk stayed by the well for 3 days, drawing water each morning, meditating nearby, listening to the birds. On the third evening, he whispered, "Let me show you something." He held a bowl of water to the sky. "See this drop?" he asked. "It is not the ocean, but it is made of ocean. And when it returns to the sea becomes itself again." He poured it slowly back into the well. "You are not small," he said. "You are a meeting point, a resting place, a reflection of something endless." The well trembled, not from shame, but from understanding. That night, it did not dream of the ocean. It dreamed of holding the sky. 6. A reflection for you, gentle listener. Tonight, maybe you too have felt small. Maybe the world seems too wide, too fast, too demanding, and you wonder if you're enough. Maybe you've said, "I'm just a parent. I'm only a clerk. I'm nobody special." But let me tell you something the monk once whispered to a well. You are not a role. You are not your limits. You are the presence that holds living water. The Buddha taught, "Within this very body lies the world, the arising of the world, and the ceasing of the world." So breathe in now. Feel the cool stillness of the well within you. You are not lacking. You are not empty. You are exactly what you need to be. A quiet vessel filled with sky. Sleep now, little well. You carry the ocean home. Story 11. The Lantern That Refused to Burn. A story of exhaustion, burnout, and the kindness of rest. 1. A beginning without fire. At the edge of the old monastery stood a stone lantern, weathered, moss-covered, leaning slightly to one side. The monks called it komyo, which meant light, though no flame had touched it for over a decade. It had once been lit every night, a small guiding flame for travelers passing through the woods. But over time, as fewer pilgrims came and the monks aged, the lantern was left untouched. Until a young monk named Daigo arrived. He was bright-eyed, eager to serve, full of ideals carried from the city. He bowed low. He rose early. He studied late. He poured himself into every task with a fire that made the older monks smile softly, knowingly. And one dusk, he came to the old stone lantern with a bundle of dry twigs and oil. "I will bring back your light," he whispered. But the lantern refused to burn. 2. The story, a flame that would not rise. At first, Daigo thought it was the wind, so he built a small screen around the lantern. Still no flame. Then he thought it must be the oil. He used fresher oil, richer oil. Nothing. He tried paper, dried pine needles, even bits of cloth from his own robes. The wick hissed, then died. Day after day he returned. Each night he sat beside the lantern, coaxing it, willing it to return to life. And each night it remained dark. His fellow monks said nothing. They simply watched. Until one morning, Daigo did not rise. He stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling beams, his hands trembling, his heart thudding like distant thunder. "I don't know why I feel this way," he said to no one in particular. "I wanted to serve. I wanted to shine. But now I feel empty." The old abbot, hearing this, sat beside him quietly for some time. Then, very gently, he spoke. "The lantern is not broken, Daigo. It is tired, just like you." 3. Zen Commentary, When Stillness is the Flame. In Zen, we often say, "A lamp that burns too fast consumes itself before dawn." Effort is not the enemy, but effort without awareness, without balance, leads to exhaustion. Daigo mistook doing for being, as many of us do. He believed his worth was in service, his light was in action. But the deeper flame of Zen does not burn with striving. It glows from presence. The lantern did not need to shine again. It needed to be honored for how long it already had. 4. Psychological insight, burnout, and self-worth. In modern psychology, burnout is not just about overwork. It's about over-identification with performance, a chronic sense that I must be useful to deserve rest. People like Daigo, those who serve, give, and aim to do good, are often the most at risk. Their fire begins as compassion, but slowly shifts into obligation, fear, self-erasure. The body whispers first, then it pleads, then it collapses. But burnout is not weakness. It is the body's most sacred boundary cry. Come back to me. 5. The turning point, the flame in the breath. The abbot led Daigo to the garden that evening, just before the sun disappeared behind the western hill. They sat beside the stone lantern, now overgrown with ivy. The abbot lit no match. He simply closed his eyes and breathed. Daigo did the same. And in the deep quiet, something curious happened. He felt warmth, not in the lantern, but in his chest. Not from a flame, but from the soft pulse of being alive. The simple rhythm of inhale, exhale, presence. He realized the light he was trying to rekindle out there was the light he had abandoned in here. Not a fire of ambition, a glow of enoughness. He wept, softly. And the lantern, though unlit, seemed to shimmer in the dusk. 6. A reflection for you who may be tired. Tonight, perhaps you too have tried to light something that refuses to burn. A goal, a relationship, a part of yourself that once glowed with passion. And now, you feel still, dim, distant. But let me tell you, you are not broken. You are resting. The Buddha said, "To rest is not laziness. It is the beginning of compassion." So put down the match tonight. Sit beside the unlit places within you, not with force, but with kindness. Let them be dark. Let them be whole. The flame will return, not when you try harder, but when you are ready to receive it without demand. Sleep well, gentle lantern. You are enough, even when you do not shine. Story 12. The Sparrow Who Taught the Emperor to Listen. A story of ego, humility, and the power of listening with the whole body. 1. Opening. The court that heard only its own voice. Long ago, in a palace made of red lacquered wood and silk curtains, there lived an emperor whose ears were sharper than any blade. And yet, he did not know how to listen. He could hear a soldier's whisper from across the courtyard. He could detect the tone of deception in a diplomat's voice. But his heart was deaf. His ministers praised him. Poets wrote of his wisdom. But among the common people, there was another name for him, the Emperor of Echoes, for he only responded to what already agreed with them. 2. The story, the bird who refused to perform. One spring, the emperor ordered the construction of a great aviary filled with the rarest birds from across the continent. Nightingales that sang in moonlight, cranes that danced in circles, parrots that recited prayers. Among them, in a simple bamboo cage, sat a single brown sparrow. She was plain, small, dull in color. Her feathers ruffled like she hadn't slept. She did not sing, did not move, did not bow. The emperor was annoyed. "What use is this bird?" he asked the keeper. "She was found injured near the southern border," the man said. "She has not spoken since." "Then teach her," the emperor said. But no matter what melody was played, what treats were offered, what threats were whispered, she remained silent. The emperor, insulted by her refusal, decided, "I will speak to her myself." 3. Zen commentary, the listening that empties the cup. In Zen, there is a teaching. The true listener is not one who waits to reply, but one who empties himself to receive. The emperor believed he had mastered listening, but what he practiced was monitoring, not presence. He listened for flaw, for agreement, for control. He had never listened without agenda. The sparrow offered him no praise, no reflection, no fear. She simply sat. And in doing so, she offered him his own silence back. 4. Psychological insight, listening versus reacting. In modern psychology, we learn that most people do not truly listen. They prepare, they filter, they react based on their past conditioning. True listening is rare and healing because it is non-reactive presence. It requires the listener to suspend judgment, to stop preparing a reply, and to allow what is being said to exist without defense. The sparrow's silence was not defiance. It was an invitation to stop hearing and begin receiving. 5. The turning point, one breath between them. That night, under a pale moon, the emperor entered the aviary alone. No guards, no musicians, just him and the sparrow. He sat before her cage, and for the first time, he said nothing. He did not command, he did not explain, he simply sat. 10 breaths passed, then 20, then more. Slowly, the sparrow opened one eye. She tilted her head, and then, without sound, she opened her beak and exhaled. Not a song, a breath, but it was enough. The emperor felt it, like wind passing through bamboo. And in that moment, something cracked, not outside, inside. A stillness he had never known before. Tears welled in his eyes, though he could not explain why. He bowed to the cage, then rose. And from that day on, he spoke less, listened more. And when asked where he had learned this wisdom, he replied, "From a bird who said nothing." 6. A reflection for you, gentle listener. Tonight, perhaps you too have spoken much, but heard little. Perhaps your mind has been filled with replies, defenses, solutions, arguments, before the question even finished. And maybe, like the emperor, you long not for control, but for connection. The Buddha once said, "If you truly listen, even the wind in the grass becomes scripture." So let this night be a sparrow beside you, small, unmoving, saying nothing, but calling you back to yourself. Listen now, not for answers, but for presence, to your breath, to your body, to the silence that needs no reply. Sleep well, kind emperor. Your heart has begun to hear. Story 13, The Lotus and the Forgotten Name. A story about ancestral karma, spiritual inheritance, and reclaiming your root without attachment. 1. A beginning beneath the mud. In a village where the river curved like a sleeping serpent and the wind whispered secrets through bamboo groves, there bloomed a lotus pond that never dried. Every year, at the 7th moon, the villagers gathered to watch the first lotus blossom rise from the water, its petals white as ash, its center golden like memory. There was a tradition too. Each time the lotus bloomed, a child was named. And so it was that a boy was born, quiet-eyed and calm, who, when held in his mother's arms beneath the full moon, did not cry, but simply blinked. They named him Renji, but Renji would one day forget his name, not just the sound of it, but the meaning beneath it. 2. The story, The Boy Who Lost Himself. Renji was different from the other children. He listened more than he spoke. He preferred shadows to sunlight. When others played, he sat by the lotus pond and watched, sometimes for hours, as dragonflies hovered and petals trembled without falling. As he grew, so did a silence inside him. Not emptiness, something else, like an echo of someone else's memory. He dreamed of temples he'd never seen, of women chanting with voices not his mother's, of war, of loss, of a wooden floor soaked in candlelight. He could not explain it. At 15, he asked the village priest, "Why do I feel lives that are not mine?" The priest replied, "Because they are, and yet they are not." 3. Zen Commentary. Who is the one that remembers? In Zen, we ask not, "Who am I?" but, "Who is the one asking?" The self is not a stone, fixed and name-bound. It is a stream of causes and conditions, ancestral winds, karmic seeds. What we inherit is not just genetics or history. We inherit unresolved gestures, whispers, longing. Fear passed through silence. Renji was not broken. He was remembering. But to cling to memory is like gripping water. To find your true self, you must hold nothing at all. 4. Psychological insight, inherited emotion, and the ghosts we carry. Modern psychology now explores what Zen has long known, that trauma can be inherited epigenetically. The grief of a grandfather, the anxiety of a mother, the shame of generations, all passed without words, living in posture, instinct, breath. Children like Renji feel this. They carry a weight that doesn't belong only to them. And often they try to find identity in that weight. But healing is not about fusing with the past. It is about witnessing it. And then bowing gently as you walk beyond it. 5. The moment of unfolding. On his 21st birthday, Renji returned to the lotus pond. He had wandered for years, temples, teachers, even foreign lands, searching for a name that felt like his own. But none stayed, none fit. That night, the pond was silent. The moon was hidden behind cloud. But one lotus, old, half-wilted, remained. He knelt before it, exhausted. "I don't know who I am," he whispered. And then, something unexpected. The lotus shed all its petals at once, revealing nothing but stillness at the core. And in that moment, Renji understood. Not intellectually, but with his breath. He had never been the name, never been the roles, the memories, or even the seeker. He was awareness, still, whole, free. A reflection for you, the one who has forgotten. Tonight, maybe you too have forgotten your name. Not the one they call you in the world, but the quiet name inside that holds your dignity, your presence, your wholeness. Maybe you carry the echoes of your family, your culture, your past selves, and wonder where you begin in the noise. Let this lotus remind you. You are not what you remember. You are not what you were told. You are the space in which remembering occurs. The Buddha once said, "In the seen, there is only the seen. In the heard, only the heard." Let go of the I in every experience, and peace will bloom like a lotus in the heart. So tonight, release the effort. Let the petals fall. Let the silence name you. Sleep well, lotus of the unseen name. You have always been enough. Story 14. The Raindrop That Held a War. A story about inner conflict, generational pain, and the peace in each breath. 1. A quiet storm begins. In a mountain temple where the bells were struck only once a day, and even the crows flew slower, there lived a monk named Toma, whose eyes seemed always to be looking inward. He was a man of stillness. His chores were done with care, his posture perfect. His voice, rarely heard, was soft and thoughtful. But when he slept, he dreamed of fire, and in those dreams, his fists clenched, his jaw locked, and sometimes tears slipped down his cheeks. No one asked, and he never told. Until one afternoon, when rain began to fall, not hard but steady, and the sound of droplets striking the temple roof was like a memory knocking. 2. The story, the storm inside the drop. Toma had grown up far from peace. His father was a soldier. His grandfather, too. Men of silence. Men who hid their wounds in the corners of their homes and the backs of their throats. Toma learned not to cry, not to ask, not to break. But some breaks happen without sound. After his father passed, Toma found a letter tucked inside a military jacket, never sent, never finished. Just 4 words, written in a trembling hand. I still hear it. Toma didn't know what it was, but part of him did. It was the sound that now lived in his chest, like thunder buried beneath ribs. So he came to the temple, not to seek awakening, but to escape the noise. And for a while, silence seemed to hold, until the rain. That afternoon, sitting on the temple porch, he watched a single raindrop trail down the old wooden beam beside him. It trembled, hesitated. Then, as it fell, it seemed to burst into 1,000 lives, each one a memory. And in that brief moment, Toma saw it. A war inside a drop. And he realized it wasn't his anymore. It was his. 3. Zen reflection, the inherited battle. In Zen, we say, the sword passed from hand to hand is not always held with hatred. Sometimes it is held with fear, sometimes with habit. Toma had inherited not a war, but the silence after it, a silence that roared. In the stillness of the temple, he had placed his pain on pause. But Zen is not escape, it is exposure. The rain did not bring the war. It revealed the drop that had held it all along. And in seeing it clearly, the battle could begin to soften. Psychological insight, generational trauma and emotional legacy. Modern psychology refers to this as intergenerational trauma, when pain, fear, or unresolved wounds are passed down not through stories, but through behaviors, silence, tension, and survival mechanisms. Children of war don't need to hear explosions to inherit them. They feel them in the way a father turns away, in the way a mother folds grief into laundry, in the way no one ever says, "This hurt me." Toma's war was not made of bullets. It was made of breath held too long. 5. The moment of surrender. The rain continued for hours. Toma did not move. Eventually, the old abbot came to sit beside him, silent, present. Together, they watched the drops collect and fall, one after another. The abbot whispered, "In each drop, the whole sky." Toma nodded, then said, "In this chest, my father's storm." The abbot gently placed a hand over Toma's heart. "You cannot undo the war," he said, "but you can choose not to carry it forward." Toma closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he wept while awake. Not in fear, but in relief. He let the drop fall, and did not chase it. 6. For you, the quiet warrior. Tonight, perhaps you carry a storm not of your making. Perhaps you inherited a silence that stings, a rage that rises from nowhere, or a grief with no clear name. Know this: you are not weak for feeling it. You are not broken for wanting peace. The Buddha taught, hatred does not cease by hatred, but by love. This is the eternal law. But love here means awareness, compassion for yourself, compassion for those who pass the war on without knowing. So breathe now. Feel the weight in your chest. Bow to it, and let it go, one drop at a time. Sleep well, storm-bearer. You are allowed to rest. Story 15. The Stranger in the Mirror of Smoke. A story about anger, illusion, and the gentle rediscovery of the true self. 1. Opening. Reflections that don't answer back. At the back of a Zen temple tucked between pine and plum trees, there was a meditation room rarely entered by visitors. Inside it hung a single mirror, not made of silver or glass, but of polished obsidian, black and soft in its reflection. They called it the Mirror of Smoke, not because it was damaged, but because those who looked too long into it often wept, and no one could say why. One monk named Haku visited the room every night. He did not weep. He stared, and he clenched his fists. 2. The story. The face that would not change. Haku had once been a teacher in the capital, eloquent, respected, feared. He taught debate, logic, and rhetoric. His students spoke of him with awe and unease. His eyes were sharp, his words sharper. But one day, a student stood and said something no one had dared. "You teach how to win, but never how to understand." Haku laughed it off, but the words followed him home like a dog he never invited. And each day after, his lectures felt more hollow. Until one morning, he left the city without telling anyone, shaved his head, wrapped himself in brown robes, and joined a mountain monastery known for its silence. He said he had come to empty himself, but part of him had come to punish himself. 3. The Mirror and the Stranger. Every night after the others slept, Haku slipped into the chamber of the Mirror of Smoke. He did not sit. He stood, arms crossed, waiting. Each night, he looked into the obsidian surface and saw a man he did not trust. His mouth twitched, his brow furrowed, his shoulders curved in suspicion. He tried to soften his gaze, tried to smile, but the mirror only seemed to reflect something deeper than face or posture. It showed the part of him that had learned to pretend, the version shaped by armor, the man who spoke only to prove something. Haku whispered, "I don't know you." The mirror whispered back, "You've never really looked." 4. Zen Commentary. The mask that learns to speak. Zen asks not, "What do you think you are?" but rather, "Before thought, before words, who is seeing through these eyes?" We all wear masks. Some are given to us: child, leader, healer, warrior. Some we shape to survive. Cleverness, confidence, detachment. Over time, we believe the mask is us. But the mirror does not lie. It shows us the habits behind our eyes, the echo we call me. To meet ourselves without role is terrifying and liberating. 5. Psychological insight, the false self and defensive identity. In modern psychology, we speak of the false self, a defensive persona developed in response to expectations, trauma, or fear of rejection. People like Haku often build their identities on being right, being strong, or being in control, not out of ego, but out of protection. But eventually, these defenses isolate the core self. We forget how to feel without analyzing, how to speak without controlling, how to see without judging. The journey back is not about becoming better. It's about becoming real. 6. The turning point, breathing through the smoke. One evening, the abbot joined Haku in the mirror room, wordless, sitting behind him. Haku spoke without turning. "I want to change this face." The abbot said, "Then stop trying to sculpt it." Silence. Then he added, "Smoke clears not by force, but by stillness." That night, for the first time, Haku sat before the mirror. He did not judge. He did not pose. He simply breathed. And in the dark glass, the stranger remained. But something softened, not in the face, but in the gaze. He whispered, "If you are me, I forgive you." And the mirror, for the first time, reflected peace. 7. For you, the one in reflection. Tonight, perhaps you too have seen a stranger in the mirror, a version of you shaped by expectation, defense, or pain. And perhaps you have tried to fix it, to force change, to escape. But Zen does not fix the mask. It invites you to let it fall. The Buddha said, "Better to conquer yourself than 1,000 battles. Then the victory is truly yours." So tonight, don't battle. Sit before your own reflection, not the one in glass, but the one in breath. Say softly, "I see you. You did what you had to do, but now you can rest." Sleep well, mirror watcher. The smoke is clearing, and beneath it, your true face is already waiting. Story 16. The door that only opened when forgotten. A story about desire, grasping, and the strange paradox of freedom. 1. Opening. A door without a handle. In the western mountains, shaded by ancient cypress trees, there was a monastery carved directly into the cliffside. Wind passed through it like breath through a flute. And within that monastery, there was a door. Old, simple, wooden, but locked. No one remembered who had built it or what lay behind it. It was not part of any room. It opened to no hallway. Yet it was there, embedded in stone, with no hinges, no handle, and no keyhole. They called it the Door of Longing. Many monks had tried to open it over the centuries, by chancing, meditating, fasting, even striking it with fists. None succeeded, except one, but not in the way anyone expected. 2. The story, the monk who wanted nothing. His name was Renshin. He arrived in late autumn, wearing patched robes, carrying no bag, and bowing to everything, the sky, the leaves, even the cracked steps beneath his feet. He asked for no teachings. He refused no tasks. He smiled often, but not brightly, more like a candle that knows it might be blown out and accepts it anyway. One day, while sweeping the corridor, He paused before the door. He stared at it, not with curiosity, not with desire, just stillness. The abbot noticed. "You know the stories," he said. Renshin nodded. "You want to open it?" Renshin replied, "I want nothing," and walked on. 3. Zen commentary. When seeking becomes the barrier. In Zen, we often say, enlightenment is like a butterfly landing on your hand. If you chase it, it flies. If you are still, it may rest. The door had never truly been locked. It was desire that closed it. Not ordinary wanting, but craving born of identity. The belief that opening it would complete the seeker, would confirm their worth, would give them what they lacked. But the moment we need something to feel whole, we have already denied our wholeness. 4. Psychological insight, the paradox of control and letting go. In modern psychology, we speak of attachment to outcome, the tendency to tie our emotional well-being to whether or not we get what we want. This creates a cycle of control, stress, and disappointment. Even noble desires like peace, insight, healing can become traps if they arise from a sense of deficiency. Renshin, unlike the others, had not surrendered out of failure. He simply didn't identify with the need. He had learned, peace does not come after the door opens. It comes when the door no longer defines us. 5. The moment the door disappeared. Years passed. Renshin stayed. He became known for his silence, his laughter during chores, his habit of bowing to puddles after rain. He never returned to the door. Then, one misty morning, while carrying firewood through the corridor, he dropped a log beside where the door had once stood, and paused. It was gone. Where there had been a door, there was now open stone. No frame, no mark, no memory of edges. He stood in quiet wonder. The abbot came behind him and whispered, "The door opens not when you find the right method, but when you no longer need to pass through." 6. For you, the seeker of the door. Tonight, perhaps you too have a door in your heart, one you knock on in your dreams, one you've built through years of effort, pain, hoping that beyond it lies joy, love, healing, peace. But what if there is no beyond? What if this moment, as it is, unadorned, unmet, unclaimed, is already the place you've been trying to reach? The Buddha said, "There is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path." So let go of the handle. Let go of the knocking. Sit beside the door, not as a beggar, not as a warrior, but as a friend, and say, "If you open, I will bow. If you do not, I will still bow." Sleep well, gentle seeker. There is no door between you and yourself. Story 17. The Temple of Footsteps. A story about presence, impermanence, and the hidden path made by walking. 1. Opening, the floor that remembered. There was once a temple built not of stone or brick, but of wood, smooth and old, creaking softly like the voice of time itself. The temple had no name. It did not need one. Its main hall was empty, save for an altar, a bell, and a polished floor worn down by generations of walking monks. If you stood silently in the center of the room and closed your eyes, you could feel it. The presence of footsteps, not ghosts, just echoes of those who had walked slowly, mindfully, again and again, turning the ordinary act of moving into a sacred act of remembering. The villagers called it the Temple of Footsteps, and among its many keepers was an old monk named Kahen. He never taught with words. He taught by walking. 2. The story: The Novice Who Rushed to Enlightenment. A young novice named Natsu arrived one spring full of fire and questions. He wanted to know how long it would take to reach awakening. He asked about scriptures, advanced techniques, esoteric postures. Kahen listened, then said nothing. He simply beckoned the boy to follow him. And so began Natsu's first lesson, one that lasted months. Each day, Kahen walked the temple floor in slow, deliberate circles, heel to toe, breath in, breath out. He never looked up. He never explained. He just walked. At first, Natsu followed eagerly, mimicking the pace, the posture. But after a week, he grew restless. "This can't be it," he muttered. After a month, he tried to walk ahead of Kahen. After 2, he left the temple grounds and wandered the hills, hoping to find something deeper. But wherever he went, he heard the same thing in the back of his mind. Step, step, step. 3. Zen reflection, walking as awakening. In Zen, walking meditation, kinhin, is not simply movement between periods of sitting. It is a teaching in itself. When walking, just walk. This simple instruction hides a secret. Each step is a moment of presence. Each moment is a doorway. We seek insight in scriptures, but forget the scripture of the soul touching wood, breath meeting air, eyes resting on nothing. The path is not ahead. It is beneath your feet, always. 4. Psychological insight, mindfulness in motion. Modern mindfulness-based therapy emphasizes the value of embodied awareness, of anchoring attention in the body, especially during movement. Walking meditation is now used to treat anxiety, dissociation, and restlessness. Because when we slow the body, the mind follows. The rhythm of the steps becomes a lullaby to the nervous system, and the floor beneath us a partner in healing. Natsu's mistake was not his questions. It was his absence from his own legs. 5. The turning point, the echo in the hall. One day, Natsu returned. He found Kayan alone, sweeping petals from the corridor. Without speaking, he bowed, then stepped on to the wooden floor. He did not walk quickly. He did not mimic. He simply walked, slowly, softly, feeling the warmth of the wood through the soles of his feet. And as he did, something strange happened. He felt the echoes of others, not as sounds, but as sensations. A weightless presence, a kindness, a rhythm older than thought. He realized he was not walking alone. Each step he took was joined by those who had come before. And in that, he found something he could not name. Not knowledge, not attainment, but peace. For you who may be running. Tonight, perhaps your mind is pacing, running towards solutions, fears, deadlines, regrets. And maybe you've forgotten the floor beneath you, forgotten your body, forgotten the temple of now. Let this story remind you. You do not walk to get somewhere. You walk to remember where you already are. So before sleep, take one breath. Then imagine a single step. Feel it, the heel, the sole, the toes pressing down, the release. You don't have to move. The step happens within. And in that step, the whole path unfolds. Sleep well, gentle walker. The floor remembers you. Story 18. The Master Who Buried His Shadow. A story about denial, suppressed pain, and the integration of wounds. 1. Opening. The Garden Without Footprints. In the southern mountains of Nara, there was a monastery famous for its stone garden. 12 white rocks, carefully placed within an ocean of raked gravel, said to represent the unshakable mind of awakening. Visitors came from far and wide to see it, but none were allowed to step into the garden, not even the monks. Only one man had the key to the inner gate, Master Genso, the abbot. He was revered across the land, gentle, wise, calm. His presence could still a crying child. His voice, when it rarely spoke, landed like falling blossoms, soft, weightless, yet undeniable. But every evening, just after dusk, when the temple was quiet, Genso would walk alone to the far corner of the grounds, to a patch of earth that had never been planted. There, he would stand for a long time, unmoving, and breathe. 2. The story, the secret beneath the silence. No one knew what lay beneath that patch of earth, not even the monks who had served him for decades. Until one night, a young novice named Rei, sleepless and curious, followed him from a distance. Hidden behind the bamboo fence, Rei watched as Genso knelt in the dirt and whispered, not chants, not sutras, but something raw, something broken. Then he wept, not quietly, not beautifully, but with the grief of a child who had lost something long ago and never been allowed to cry. Rei stepped back, startled. He had never seen a master cry. The next morning, he approached Genso and bowed. "Master," he asked, "what is buried there?" The old man closed his eyes for a long while, then said, "My shadow." 3. Zen reflection, the light that casts a shadow. In Zen, we often mistake awakening for perfection. We think the master has no anger, no fear, no memory that aches. We imagine they float above suffering, but this is not the way. Where there is light, there is shadow. To know one is to bow to both. Genso had spent his youth in war. He had taken lives, made choices no man should carry alone. When he came to the temple, he buried the past, not as denial, but as an attempt to begin again. But karma is not erased by time. It waits, not to punish, but to be seen. 4. Psychological insight, suppressed emotion, and the false image of purity. Modern psychology speaks of the shadow self, a concept introduced by Carl Jung, the unconscious part of the personality that contains the aspects we disown: rage, guilt, envy, regret. Many spiritual seekers, in pursuit of purity, repress these emotions. They wear peace as armor. But what is not acknowledged becomes distorted. The tears Genso shed were not weakness. They were integration. He was no longer hiding from the war inside. He was inviting it home. 5. The moment the shadow was touched. Weeks passed. Then, one morning, Rei returned to the patch of earth. This time, Genso was waiting. He handed the novice a small wooden box, plain, heavy. Inside, a worn blade, wrapped in blood-stained cloth. A letter never sent, and a name. Genso said nothing. Rei understood everything. Then the old man smiled, softer than ever before. "Today," he said, "I am not only a monk, I am also the man who once ran. And that," he added, "is freedom." 6. A reflection for you, who carries a hidden part. Tonight, maybe you too have buried something, a mistake, a version of yourself, a memory too loud for daylight. And perhaps, like Genso, you've worn stillness like a shield, thinking that healing means never trembling again. But let me offer you this. The Buddha said, "As a lotus grows in muddy water, so does wisdom grow from the dark places in us." You don't have to be pure to be whole. You don't have to be perfect to be at peace. You only have to turn to the place you've hidden and sit there a while. So tonight, breathe deeply and say, "Come home, shadow. There is room for you here. Sleep well, whole one. The garden remembers your footsteps." Story 19. The Ink That Wrote Without a Brush. A story about expression, silence, and being understood without words. 1. Opening. The scroll no one touched. In a quiet corner of the Eastern monastery, behind a shoji screen that hadn't been slid open in years, there lay a scroll. It was unmarked, unhung, unfinished. And yet, the abbot insisted it remain there. "This scroll," he once told a curious visitor, "contains our greatest teaching." "But there is nothing on it," the man said, peeking through the screen. "Exactly," the abbot smiled. "Few understood. Even fewer stayed long enough to feel it. Except for one, a mute calligrapher named Isho." 2. The story. The scribe who could not speak. Isho had arrived with winter snow, his robe tattered, his hands ink-stained, his voice lost since childhood. The monks asked no questions. He did not speak, but his presence filled the room like incense, subtle, fragrant, shaping the atmosphere without needing to be seen. They gave him a quiet cell and a corner of the meditation hall to paint. Each day, he drew single kanji characters on rice paper. Each stroke, measured, mindful, breathing. But he never titled them. He never explained. One day, a novice asked him to paint the word compassion. Isho bowed. He closed his eyes, then dipped his brush in water instead of ink, and painted. The page remained blank. The novice was confused. The abbot wept. 3. Zen commentary. What cannot be written must be felt. Zen is not against words, but it moves beyond them. The finger points to the moon, but do not mistake the finger for the moon. Isho understood that some truths are too deep for symbols, too whole to be broken into strokes. His silence was not emptiness, it was total presence. His painting with water was not a joke or trick. It was the perfect expression of compassion, clear, unseen, temporary, like breath. 4. Psychological insight, nonverbal communication, and the power of being seen. In therapy, we learn that what heals is not advice, but presence. Many people suffer not because they are unloved, but because they are unheard, unseen, misunderstood. Isho's art offered no slogans, no mantras, no clever phrases. Instead, it held space, inviting the viewer to meet their own silence. His blank page became a mirror, and in that reflection, healing began. Sometimes the soul does not want answers. It just wants to be allowed to speak without words. 5. The moment the ink revealed itself. On the first day of spring, after 5 years in the monastery, Isho disappeared. No letter, no sound. Only the scroll he had kept with him, wrapped in silk, was left at the altar. The monks gathered around it, hesitating. Finally, the abbot unrolled it. There was no character on the paper, but beneath it, ever so faintly, was a pattern. Invisible strokes, water that had dried but left its trace. The entire scroll was filled, page after page, of nothing, and yet everything. No brush, no ink, just intention, just heart. The monks bowed, one by one. Some cried, some smiled, some simply sat for hours beside it, finally understanding what he had written all along. 6. For you, the one without words. Tonight, perhaps you have something inside that cannot be said, a grief that has no vocabulary, a joy too tender for sentences, or a truth you've carried quietly for years. Let this story whisper to you. You do not need a brush. You do not need to explain. Your presence is already a painting. The Buddha once said, "The wise speak not because they have something to say, but because they know when silence is enough." So tonight, put down the effort to phrase it right. Breathe. Feel the page of your being. Let each breath draw unseen ink across the sky of your chest. You are understood, even here, even now. Sleep well, silent artist. The message has already been received. Story 20. The Mask of the Compassionate Thief. A story about moral ambiguity, intention, and the hidden layers of ethical truth. 1. Opening. A night of missing rice. In the foothills of a rural province, where fireflies outnumbered lamps and silence came with the stars, there was a modest Zen temple known as Mugenso, meaning without trace. It lived up to its name. No gate, no sign, no record of its founding. It was home to just 5 monks, a vegetable garden, and a small storeroom of rice that fed them through each season. One morning, they awoke to find a single bag missing. No sign of break-in, no footprints, just one less bag, and a trail of rice grains leading into the forest. 2. The story. The man who stole quietly. The monks were puzzled, but not angry. The abbot, a man named Shoin, simply said, "Let us watch." The next night, they placed a candle near the storeroom. The night after that, they stayed awake in silence. On the third night, just before the moon reached its peak, they saw him. A man, thin, cloaked, eyes lowered, not rushing, not fumbling. He entered with the gentleness of someone who didn't want to disturb even the shadows. He took only one small bag of rice. He bowed to the empty room, then disappeared into the woods. The monks turned to the abbot. "Shall we stop him?" one asked. "No," Shoin said. "Shall we confront him?" "No." "Shall we give him more?" Shoin paused. "Not yet." 3. Zen reflection. The karma behind the act. In Zen, we do not look at action alone. We look at the mind before the action. To steal with greed is bondage. To steal with compassion is a koan. The man who entered their storeroom was not desperate, nor selfish. He moved with intention and bowed as if to apologize to the rice itself. To the monks, he became a riddle, a thief who honored the silence more than some who prayed inside it. 4. Psychological insight, moral complexity, and hidden motives. Modern ethics often operates in binaries, right and wrong, legal and illegal. But psychology shows us that behavior is layered. People steal not only for gain, but for survival, shame, obligation, or even to protect others. The monks could have judged, but judgment closes inquiry. Instead, they watched. And by watching, they witnessed a contradiction. A man who broke the rules yet radiated humility. And that contradiction opened their compassion. 5. The mask removed. One rainy night, the thief came again. But this time, the abbot was waiting, alone, seated in the dark. When the man saw him, he froze. I didn't mean," he began. Shoin raised his hand gently. "I know." Then gestured to the fire. The man knelt. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the soft crackle of wood. Finally, the man spoke. "My daughter is sick. I have no land, no name. I wear this cloak because shame keeps my face hidden." Shoin nodded. "Then, tonight, let the mask rest." The man wept, not loudly, but like leaves falling in wet soil. The next morning, the monks found 2 bags of rice missing, but beside the shelf was a folded note. One is for my daughter. One is for the old woman in the valley who feeds only on broth. R. 6. For you who carries 2 selves. Tonight, perhaps you carry a mask, not of crime, but of contradiction. Perhaps part of you gives with kindness, and part of you hides in fear. Perhaps you've judged yourself for moments of weakness, or questioned whether your motives are ever fully pure. Let this story be your lantern. You are not the mask. You are not even the contradiction. You are the heart beneath both. The Buddha said, "It is not what you do, but how you do it, and with what mind." So tonight, drop the labels. Let go of the courtroom inside. Sit with your quiet self and say, "Even in my brokenness, I can still bow." Sleep well, masked one. Your kindness has not gone unseen. Story 21. The Bell That Rang from a Dream. A story about intuition, deep knowing, and the mysterious calls that shape our path. 1. Opening, the bell tower that never sounded. In a valley where clouds slept low and rivers flowed without map, there stood a temple known for its silence. It had no chanting, no music, no sermons. Only a tall wooden bell tower with a bell that had not rung in 73 years. No one knew why. No rope, no striker, just the bell. Wide, bronze, moss-covered, like an open mouth forever holding its breath. It had become part of the temple's identity. Visitors came from distant cities, not to hear it, but to see what refused to speak. Until one night, a young monk named Haru dreamed of it, and in his dream, the bell rang. 2. The story, the sound without a source. Haru was new to the temple, sent from the north after years of intellectual study. He had memorized sutras, debated scholars, even lectured at a university. But his heart felt distant from his words. So he came to the silent temple, hoping to feel again. Weeks passed. He swept, sat, cooked, sat again. But something in him remained untouched. Then one night he dreamed. He stood before the bell. No rope, no hand, and yet it rang. A sound deeper than thunder. A sound that did not pass through ears, but through bones. When he woke, he was crying. He did not know why. 3. Zen Commentary, the sound that has no echo. In Zen, we speak often of the sound of one hand clapping, a koan meant to break logic and invite direct experience. Likewise, the bell in Haru's dream did not exist in form. It existed in truth. What awakens you is not what you see, but what you are ready to hear. The bell was not calling Haru from outside. It was rising from within, from the part of him that had grown quiet beneath years of proving and explaining. Now, it was ready to speak. 4. Psychological insight, dream as inner teacher. Modern psychology recognizes that dreams are not meaningless. They are symbols in motion, messengers from the unconscious. Often, when a person is stuck, intellectually certain but emotionally numb, the psyche sends images to bridge the gap. For Haru, the bell was that bridge. It asked no question, gave no command. It simply rang, and in doing so, revealed a longing he had buried. To feel something real, not taught, not spoken, just known. 5. The turning point, following the sound. The next night, Haru returned to the bell tower, not in a dream, but with bare feet and trembling hands. He stood beneath it, still. The moonlight touched the rim. He whispered, "I heard you." Nothing happened. He stayed for hours. Eventually, the abbot approached. "You seek the bell?" he asked. "I seek the sound," Haru replied. The abbot nodded. "Then sit here every night, not to listen, but to become the one who hears." So Haru sat, not hoping, not waiting, just softening. And slowly the sound returned, not in the bell, but in the spaces between thoughts, in the breath, in the stillness that asks nothing and gives everything. 6. A reflection for you who may be listening. Tonight, maybe you too are waiting for something to ring, a sign, a voice, a certainty. But what if the sound you seek is not far away? What if it's already rising, quietly, beneath the noise of your doubt? The Buddha once said, "When the student is ready, the teacher appears, but often the teacher appears as silence." So, before sleep, sit still. Imagine the bell above you. Don't strike it. Don't beg. Just say, "If you choose to ring, I am here." And let that be enough. Sleep well, dreamer of deep tones. The bell remembers you. Story 22. The Ashes That Bloomed in the Wind. A story about loss, impermanence, and the quiet resurrection of the heart. 1. Opening, the garden where nothing grew. On the edge of a forgotten village where the soil had long turned to dust and the well ran dry, there lay a walled garden. No flowers bloomed there, no birds sang, only silence. And in the center of this silence stood a woman named Aiko, dressed in white, holding a wooden box against her chest. Inside were the ashes of her only child. Each morning she stood in the garden and scattered a few grains of ash onto the cracked earth. No prayer, no tears, just wind and ashes. She did this for 49 days. And on the 50th, something stirred. 2. The story, the monastery's quiet visitor. The nearby monastery had seen her from a distance, always standing, never speaking. Some said she had gone mad from grief. Others said she was waiting for a sign. The abbot, an elderly monk named Tetsu, watched without judgment. One evening, he walked to the edge of her garden and bowed. She did not speak. He sat with her in silence. On the third day, she whispered, "He was all I had." Tetsu replied, "And what are you now?" She clutched the box tighter. "Empty," she said. The monk nodded. "Then you are ready to bloom." 3. Zen Commentary, the flower that grows from ash. In Zen, death is not an end. It is a gate. What is born must dissolve. But in dissolving, it reveals what cannot be touched. Aika had mistaken grief for identity. But pain, when held gently, does not destroy us. It opens us. It teaches us the texture of impermanence, the gift of breath, the sweetness of every fleeting moment. Ashes are not waste. They are memory released. 4. Psychological insight, the transformation of grief. Modern psychology recognizes the stages of grief, not as fixed steps, but as waves: denial, anger, sorrow, acceptance. But beyond acceptance, there is something more subtle: integration. It is when we no longer carry the loss as a wound, but as a root. From it, new meaning can grow. Aiko's ritual, though wordless, was therapeutic. She was not discarding her child. She was feeding the earth with love, turning sorrow into offering. And slowly, that offering began to change her. 5. The blooming and the wind. On the 50th day, Aiko woke before dawn. She opened the box. There was only a small handful left. She walked to the center of the garden, placed the last of the ashes into the wind, and stood there, eyes closed. The wind lifted them gently, as if the earth itself were sighing. Then, without warning, raindrops began to fall, the first in months. She tilted her face to the sky and let it wash over her. Behind her, the abbot appeared. He held a single seed in his hand. "Would you plant this?" he asked. She nodded. She dug a hole with her bare hands, placed the seed, and covered it with wet dust and tears. Months passed. One morning, the monks found her kneeling beside a sprout, a single green stem trembling in the breeze. She looked up and smiled. Not because she had moved on, but because something had moved through her. 6. A reflection for you who has lost. Tonight, perhaps you carry ashes too, not in a box, but in memory. A person, a season, a version of yourself now gone. Let this story remind you. Grief does not ask to be erased. It asks to be honored. The Buddha once said, "Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, so too a person cannot live without sorrow." But sorrow is not your enemy. It is the soil of your compassion. So before you sleep, close your eyes. Picture the ashes in your heart. Whisper, "Thank you for the love. I now offer you to the wind." Then rest. Something green may already be growing. Sleep well, gentle one. The earth has received your offering. Story 23. The River That Refused to Flow. A story about resistance, surrender, and the healing found in movement. 1. Opening, a river that stood still. Long ago, in a land where fog clung to the mountains like forgotten thoughts, there was a river that stopped moving. It had flowed for centuries, carving valleys, nourishing forests, singing lullabies to the moon. But one winter, it simply halted. The villagers were baffled. The monks whispered of curses. The farmers spoke of drought. Yet the skies remained wet, the mountains melting snow, and still the river did not budge. At the very edge of the frozen surface, a young boy named Jiro would sit every morning, watching, listening, waiting for the river to speak. One day, it did. 2. The story, a boy and a river that could feel. Jiro had lost his father to the current 2 summers before. The man had been a fisherman, gentle, smiling, always smelling of cedarwood and salt. One stormy night, the boat tipped. The river took him and never gave him back. Since then, Jiro came to the river not to fish, but to watch it grieve. He imagined the river was sad too, that it missed his father and had stopped flowing, so no more lives would be lost. But one morning, as mist curled like ghosts above the surface, Jiro heard something deep. A voice, not of words, but of movement remembered. The river whispered, "I am not still. I am afraid." 3. Zen reflection. Flow is the nature of all things. In Zen, we are taught that the essence of life is movement without resistance. To flow like water is to be at peace with what changes. But sometimes, even a river forgets. It confuses stillness with safety. Just as we, when hurt, try to stop time, to lock our hearts, to freeze our feelings, thinking that if we stay still, we cannot be broken again. Yet what is frozen cracks, and what is held back festers. The river, like the soul, must return to its source, through movement, through letting go. 4. Psychological insight, the paralysis of grief and emotional repression. Psychology recognizes that trauma can freeze us. After loss or shock, the nervous system may enter a protective state of immobility, a kind of inner river that refuses to move forward. Jiro's grief mirrored the river's stillness. He stopped playing, stopped singing, stopped trusting. Both child and current were trapped in a silent winter. But healing begins when stillness is met with compassion, not force. And the first thaw is often a tear. 5. The return of the flow. On the 7th day of the 3rd spring, the villagers awoke to a sound none had heard in years. A low murmur, a hush like breath on glass. The river had begun to move, not fast, not bold, but sure. The ice cracked gently. Water pushed through like a memory finding its words. And at the shore stood Jiro, barefoot, smiling. He had thrown his father's wooden fishing rod into the river the night before. Not in anger, not in worship, but as a gift. He whispered, "You can take him, but I am still here, and I will walk." The river flowed, and in its current, something shifted inside him too. 6. A reflection for you who may be holding still. Tonight, perhaps something in you refuses to move. A pain held too long. A love you cannot name. A fear of losing more. Let this story remind you. You are not broken because you paused. You are not weak for staying still. But the time will come, and maybe it has already come, when the river inside you begins to stir again. The Buddha once said, "Just as a tree grows by bending with the wind, so too the heart heals by flowing with life." So sit quietly now. Place your hands on your chest and say, "I do not need to know the path. I only need to allow the current." Sleep well, gentle one. The river is moving again, and so are you. Story 24. The Lantern That Burned Without Flame. A story about silent guidance, inner radiance, and becoming light in darkness. 1. Opening. The Village with No Stars. There was once a village nestled in a hidden valley where the sky seemed to forget the stars. Clouds clung to the mountains year-round. No moonlight, no starlight, only lanterns. Each home kept one burning through the night, flickering yellow in a sea of gray. Without them, the villagers believed the darkness would swallow the roads, and people would forget how to return home. But in the smallest house, at the farthest edge, stood an old woman named Tomiko. Her lantern had no flame, and yet people said her house was the warmest of all. 2. The story, The Lantern Without Oil. Children whispered that Tomiko was a witch. Elders said she was once a nun. But Tomiko said nothing. She simply welcomed all who knocked, travelers, beggars, even those who had nowhere to go. They would sit in her tiny room, drink hot barley tea, and leave feeling as though a soft light had been poured into their chest. One stormy night, a boy named Kenji ran to her door. He had lost his dog. He had lost his way. And something in him had broken. She opened the door without a word. He looked around. "There's no lantern," he said. Tomiko smiled. "Exactly." 3. Zen Reflection. The Light That Is Not Seen. Zen teaches that true light is not something you see, it is something you feel. The sun warms without asking for your gaze. The candle burns whether you notice it or not. Tomiko's lantern was a koan. How can a lantern burn without flame? The answer? It never needed to burn. Because the real lantern was her presence. She did not preach, She did not fix, she listened. And in her stillness, others remembered their own light. 4. Psychological insight, co-regulation, and the power of safe presence. Modern psychology speaks of co-regulation, the nervous system's ability to calm when near someone grounded. In a world of anxiety and disconnection, presence is healing. Tomiko's silence offered what no lantern could: safety. She wasn't trying to distract Kenji from his loss. She allowed it, held it like a soft cloth. And slowly, the trembling in his breath settled. This is the deepest compassion, not to remove someone's darkness, but to sit beside them until they remember the dawn. 5. The flame within. Kenji returned the next night, and the next. Eventually, he brought others, friends who felt lost, elders who couldn't sleep. Tomiko still had no flame, but her home glowed more with each visitor. One spring evening, the village's main lantern tower caught fire. People panicked, afraid the darkness would consume them. But when they turned to Tomiko's home, they saw a strange thing. Though her lantern remained unlit, people were gathering there, sitting in a ring, breathing, softly smiling. And somehow, the road between the homes felt brighter, not from oil or wick, but from hearts that had remembered how to warm. 6. A reflection for you who may doubt your light. Tonight, you may feel like a lantern with no oil left, tired, dim, invisible. Let this story remind you. You do not need to shine loudly. You do not need to fix or impress. You only need to be. The Buddha once said, "Just as the full moon does not try to reflect on water, it simply rests and the water reflects it." So close your eyes. Place your hand on your chest. Feel the gentle heat of your own being. You are already a lantern. Even in your stillness, you are warming the path for someone else. Sleep well, quiet flame. The night remembers your glow. Story 25. The Bamboo That Bent for No One. A story about quiet strength, humble resilience, and the wisdom of not resisting. 1. Opening. A bamboo that would not sway. In a remote mountain village where winds howled like hungry ghosts, there stood a bamboo grove known across the province. The villagers called it the grove that never broke. They believed the bamboo held ancient spirits, that it stood stronger than storms, prouder than trees. And in the center of this grove was a single stalk, taller and stiffer than the rest. The children called it the Proud One. It stood straighter than all others, refused to bend, refused to move, even when the wind sang its wildest songs. Until, one winter, the proud bamboo cracked. Not from age, not from time, but from a silence too heavy to carry. 2. The story. The young monk and the cracked bamboo. A young monk named Nari arrived at the village that same winter. He had traveled far after failing his first temple posting, his mind sharp but impatient, his voice confident but rarely kind. Seeking humility, his master sent him north, saying only, "Go learn from what grows without speaking." Nari reached the village and saw the broken bamboo, split clean through its center. A single gust of wind had done what years of reverence could not. He asked the villagers, "Why did this one break while others swayed?" They shrugged. It was the strongest. Nari shook his head. No, it was the most afraid. 3. Zen reflection, the power of yielding. Zen does not glorify rigidity. It honors the softness that endures. The oak falls in the storm, The reed bows and survives. The proud bamboo tried to prove its strength by resisting everything. But resistance is not wisdom. It is fear dressed as armor. To bend is not to surrender. It is to remain whole. Like water, which shapes stone not through force, but through patience. 4. Psychological insight. Rigidity and the illusion of control. In psychology, emotional rigidity often stems from early wounds, where control becomes a shield against pain. People become proud like the bamboo, upright, unyielding, determined not to feel weak again. But what is unyielding often shatters under pressure. True resilience lies in flexibility, the ability to adapt, to feel, to soften without losing self. Nari saw this in the grove. The other bamboo had swayed through storms, bent low in humility, and in doing so, they stood tall still. 5. The teaching of the grove. Nari began visiting the grove each dawn. He bowed to the cracked bamboo, then sat in meditation among the ones that swayed. He watched how they moved with wind, not against it. He placed his pride before them like an offering, and slowly his posture softened. His speech grew quieter. One spring morning, he saw a sapling growing beside the cracked bamboo. It bent naturally with the breeze. Nari whispered to it, "You are stronger than you know." The villagers later said Nari stayed for years. They called him the bending monk. And in time, when the winds grew fierce, people came not to pray to the stiff stalk in the center, but to sit among the ones that danced. 6. A final reflection for you who has come this far. This is the last tale of our journey tonight. Perhaps you too have tried to stand firm for too long. Perhaps life has taught you to resist, to appear strong, to not show the tremble inside. But let this story be a mirror. You do not need to be the tallest, or the straightest, or the one who never bows. You need only be alive and willing to sway. The Buddha once said, "Yielding is strength. Letting go is the highest power." So tonight, before you sleep, breathe deeply. Feel the wind of your thoughts pass through you. Let yourself bend. Let yourself rest. You have nothing to prove. Sleep well, gentle reed. The storm has passed, and you are still here. And now, dear listener, you have journeyed through 25 lantern-lit paths, through rivers that remembered, bells that dreamed, and bamboo that finally bent. Each story a whisper, each whisper a mirror. Perhaps something inside you stirred, a breath, a memory, a silent ache finding space to soften. Know this: you do not need to rush toward awakening. You do not need to fix or reach or strive. You are already enough, here, in this stillness, with the sound of your breath and the quiet company of your own being. Let the teachings rest in you now, like seeds in spring soil. They do not ask to be understood, only to be held. So gently now, close your eyes. Let go of today. Let the night carry you, not away, but home. The path is not out there. The path is within you. Sleep deeply, kind soul, and when you wake, may you carry a little more light, with no flame, no noise, just presence. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.